Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court appointed and private, marriage counseling using the EFT method, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide individual one-on-one sessions in both French or English, and also do group settings. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMV Therapy and Coaching Services at 301-325-1550, and our website can be found at lifecoachdananzalak.com. Today, I'm very excited to have for our 8th episode of Season 12, a very special guest and executive performance coach, Elizabeth St. Louis. And just like every of my past episode, I will leave it up to the guests to properly introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Yeah, my name's Elizabeth Lewis, and I help Type A entrepreneurs increase their cognitive awareness to advance their wealth and confidence in about 6 weeks. But usually my clients see pretty drastic results after 3 sessions.
Excellent. So explain to our listeners, what is the executive performance coach?
Yeah, so I work with, well, let me say it this way. If you've ever seen the show Billions, I do what Wendy Rhodes does. That's the best articulation of it if you're familiar with the show Billions. If you're not familiar with the show Billions, what I do is I partner with people or companies to help them improve their performance, to improve their bottom line, and learn those interpersonal, organizational, self-confidence, and other skills so that they can improve their personality traits to be the most effective where they are and really optimize their life so they can achieve those goals much faster.
So what brought you to become one?
Yeah, so I actually, and this sounds a little arrogant, but I had a really traumatic childhood, and I was really frustrated with therapists because therapy is not always the best, and not every therapist needs to be a therapist. And I couldn't figure out how to overcome my trauma. Instead, all these therapists were more so amazed at what I had survived and lived through.
Okay.
And so I got my first master's in psychology to fix myself, because I was like, well, if these therapists aren't going to fix me, then I'll just fix myself.
Yes.
And I ended up doing so, and I ended up naturally being so good that my professors gave me their client overflow.
Wow.
And
okay.
then the rest is history. And then I got a second degree in mental health counseling, and now I'm just doing it for a living, loving it.
So how, and a lot of people are also struggling to understand, what is the main difference between, or the thin line between the therapist and the coach? When can a therapist become a coach? And obviously a coach cannot become a therapist, so because it have different kind of education. So how do you transfer or convert your services into the executive performance coaching?
Well, actually, being a therapist, and so I've studied human behavior for 28 years, and being a therapist just helps me do a better job in the coaching at the end of the day. I'm able to go deeper as a coach. And because I do have the credentials of being a therapist, I know what I'm doing when I go deeper. It's funny. A lot of my professors and I would have this conversation of what's the difference from a coach and a therapist, big picture. And it really comes down to ethics to a degree. Obviously, the education is there 100%. Not every coach needs to be a coach, but that's through any field as well. So for me, because I'm technically have degrees in both, I can integrate them quite well. Coaches typically look more towards the future, and therapists typically look more towards the past.
Yes.
That's kind of like the generalization, but there's a lot of strength-based therapists out there that also do a lot of the same components as coaches too, as moving forward. And then I also like to say, like, just going to a coach where you ignore your past can be dangerous, simply because like a lot of our crap comes from childhood that we've got to
Yes.
sort out.
I agree with you 100%, Elizabeth. And also, I can see that the coach basically they guide you through a path that
Yeah.
allows you to be able to make the changes that you want from within. But the therapist will focus primarily on all the issues that you had in the past, try to fix that so you could change your existing present, so your future can actually be brighter. So again, they teach you how to be mindful, how to live a mindful life, and be able to change certain cognitive behaviors that allows you to become a better person and not really focus or let the past linger
Yeah.
inside of you for too long. So it has to be a good balance between both, I think. And a lot of would say therapists, either they go through the route of coaching because it's much more profitable.
Mhm.
The therapists are more likely to say, well, if I have to take insurance, then the challenges of filing claims, etc., that can be a problem. So how do you see the future of coaching and the future of therapy?
This might sound rude, but I don't necessarily care about the future of coaching or the future of therapy, because I only necessarily care about my practice and how I do things. I think they're all broken to a degree. I think at the end of the day, there's all the studies that come out that the placebo effect is one of the most impactful things that we can use. And if you have a trusting relationship with a girlfriend or, a male friend, that can be just as effective as therapy. It really just comes down to trust. So I think it's more so finding someone you're going to work with who has the desire and the passion to keep learning and keep working on themselves, because I don't think any person can take you further than they've already gone.
Yeah.
And, this is like an ethical oath that we take as therapists, to always work on ourselves and to always improve. I personally specialize in neuropsychotherapy, which is why my clients get transformation so quickly. I think more therapists and coaches, well, I think coaches need to have more psychology background, quite frankly, because you can just roll out of bed and say you're a coach, and I'm like, great, that doesn't really mean anything. But for therapists, and I think we're getting there, but I think that therapists need to have better education around neurobiology and neuroscience. I think they need to understand how the brain works, because a traditional therapist just focuses on your emotions and your feelings, whereas a neuropsychotherapist is focusing on your brain health and your behavior in connection to your emotions and your feelings. And it's kind of like functional medicine. Like, you have to take in the whole being. You can't do what Western medicine does, which is like segregate parts from the body. Like, that's not how it works. I mean, we were talking about working out before we started, and it's just like, when one muscle goes, it impacts the rest of the muscles. It's all interconnected. And so you have to see someone who's a whole, but you also have to figure out who you work well with. I work well with people who need to understand why they do what they do before they can buy into anything. And so people have to remember that psychology is very, very subjective and abstract. It is not a hard science. It's a theory. Everyone's going to have a different perspective. So you have to find the person who works best for you. And unfortunately, that can take time. And I think we need to be a little bit more honest about therapy. I mean, you and I were talking about it. Like, it's not unified. I mean, you can go to the West Coast and you're going to have like the LPPC or the LC.
Correct.
And then in the East Coast, you have LPC. So I think there needs to be unification. I think the education needs to be better. It's disgusting how little therapists learn.
Yes, I agree with you 100%, Elizabeth. And I do see a lot of people come and they have different concerns that they've seen many, many therapists. So, I mean, those who even have that accreditation and all, but yet they could not find a solution.
Yeah.
The purpose of a therapist is that when you come to them, you have a problem, give me a solution. But
right.
the therapist is kind of like beating around the bush, not giving really anything that is related to, okay, so where is, I know my problem, but how can I fix it? And there's no really available solution to it. And the thing is that needs to change, because then people bounce from one therapist to the other. They're like serial therapists, and then they never really find a way to figure out, I'm still the same as I was 5 years ago.
Yep.
Where do I change, or how can I change?
Yeah, that's why I got my first master's, because it was so frustrating. And I think some of this is because therapists are, I don't know if you remember this in school too, but like, we're told to not tell them anything. We're told to just like take their guide, I guess, and they don't know what they don't know. Like, they don't know what they need to work on. I can't tell you how many clients have come in and thought their core issue was this, and I'm like, yeah, okay, cool, but that's a symptom of actually this.
Yes.
And so I think that, and it's a fine line, because you cannot tell them what to do, and you don't want to create a codependent client. But you also, yeah, you can't just. So after World War I, therapy changed, psychology changed. It went from what was going right in your life to what's going wrong in your life because of shock cell syndrome, and that was kind of a new phenomenon back then. And the issue is, when you constantly talk about your problems, you strengthen the synaptic nerve connections. And so you're making your problems more a default way in your life, right? The goal should be to starve your neurons, the ones that are creating that negative behavior, rebalance your brain, refeed the impoverished neurons, and really create that rewiring of the brain that a therapist needs to know how to be able to do without bluntly telling the client, right? There's ways that you can do that through just communication and interacting with nonverbals. And unfortunately, either I kind of stutter because I've noticed that so many therapists are so uncomfortable in their craft. And they're so like,
is it unknowledgeable, or when you say uncomfortable, in which regard?
in like that they're so in their head in the session, that they're so focused on being like a good therapist versus creating transformation with a client, because they're trying to, I don't know if therapists are just, a lot of them, and this is going to be an overgeneralization comment, but like so many of them struggle with perfectionism, it seems like. And so they want to do what's right and they want to do what the book says to do. And I'm like, you need to learn the book and throw it out the window. It's not going to help you at the end of the day. Like, where you get your education is through experiences, through studying your own resources, figuring out what's good for you. But I mean, this is why I like positive and strength-based therapists, because you have to teach them the skills. There's a lot of psychoeducation that has to happen, and the skills to defeat sadness and depression are completely different set of cognitive skills compared to optimism. And so it's like, what do you really want? Because if you want to understand why you are the way you are, great, find someone who's like that, who can explain it to you, but then shift it to who do you want to be and how do we get there? Because at some point you got to let the past be in the past.
Well, that's true. But do you think it is because, not because of the therapist, but because of the Board of Licensing and Regulation that puts so much stringent regulation into them, that they are like sitting on eggshell? They're afraid to say something that the patient will feel, oh my God, now they make me feel more depressed, I'm going to sue them. So it's so easy to be able to lose your licenses, to be able to get sued, etc. So it's a very like thin line. So the therapist, I don't blame them for feeling so cautious and following, as you mentioned, the rules in a very stringent way. But at the same time, do they really have a choice, Elizabeth?
Well, and so I'm not licensed, and you couldn't pay me enough to get licensed, because I think the ACA and the APA have some sticks up their ass and some unrealistic expectations. Like the fact that you can't refer a client out because you have a difference of values is stupid. That is dangerous to work with anyone who has a different set of values than you, because it's going to be an unconscious bias. Like it's just going to be there. So I would completely agree with that. I think that that's a big part of it as well, 100%. But I will also tell you, because I recently talked to a professor about this, they some schools end up kicking out a good 40% of prospective future therapists, because by the time they get to their internships and practicums, they are terrible. They do not need to be in this craft, because it is, the KCRAP program, or however you pronounce that acronym. They want you to pass the test. The test has nothing to do with human behavior and interacting with people. It's about laws and ethics and BS and red tape.
Yes. Oh, I am behind you 1,000,000%, Elizabeth. And I have seen, and I've gone through my doctorate degree, I've gone through a lot of this different studies. I did dialectical, I did cognitive, and all this. I said, you know what? How can that be put into practicality? I mean, it's completely irrelevant. Now, yeah, they talk about the different illnesses, the bipolar 1, bipolar 2, etc. But when people, they're in the practicum, they are actually doing the internship, and they have no clue what the hell they're doing. I said, did you really go to school?
Yeah. Yeah. And then school teaches you all these things that are so unnecessary that you would actually learn in the field. It's like, what? This doesn't make any sense.
I know. It is sad. And that's, and I could understand why you're very cautious about answering the question of how do you see the future of therapists and coaching. But at the same time, if we're not there, who's going to help the population, Elizabeth? Who's going to help the people who are going through all the challenges that we see on a day-to-day basis? But then are we misdirecting those patients to actually feel worse than what they feel?
That's a great question. I mean, all I can do is create a platform for myself to speak and hope I don't get canceled. Since we're kind of speaking against the government, I guess. And that's all I can do. I mean, naturally, I'm an advocate. When people call me and they don't like my prices and they're like, shocked that I charge is what I charge, it's just like, look, you can go somewhere else, but I'm going to encourage you not to go to someone who takes insurance or don't use your insurance, because you have to be diagnosed in 6 weeks. And what people don't realize is the DSM is subjective. I mean, we're all bipolar. If we go by the DSM, it says 1 manic episode.
Yeah.
We've all had a manic episode. I'm so sorry. At some point, we've all lost it.
Mhm.
And true, bipolar 1 is missing a chromosome in a certain part of your brain. So very few therapists actually send them to an MRI to get that.
Mhm.
I personally think that the government is suppressing mental health because it is a way to control us. I mean, there is this stigma of like, it's okay not to be okay, or, it's okay if you have a mental health matter. Well, no, it's actually not okay. It's not okay for you to just stay there. Like, great, you have mental health problems. Who doesn't? But then put action behind it, move forward. So I do agree. I do think that as therapists, we need to speak up and do something about it. But at the same time, what I'm hearing with my therapist community is like, we don't really know how to do that. We don't really have the time to do that because it is exhausting listening to people. I mean, we get burnout too. And I think that those who have a platform in the mental health world have a duty to speak up and share the truth at the end of the day. What do you think?
But okay, so there's no longer a stigma of people dealing with mental illness. Before in the past, if you were dealing with depression, anxiety, you kept it to yourself.
Right.
But when you keep it to yourself, you do not address the problem. So
Mm-mm.
the problem continue lingering into your life until it gets worse, and then other people are getting really affected by it. But then,
Right.
if you, I mean, I can see that you are someone who works out, who takes care of herself. So when you look at body positivity and all those movements to love yourself the way that you are, so if you are morbidly overweight, it's okay to love yourself. So aren't we telling the population that go ahead, eat yourself to death? And it doesn't matter because you have the body positivity mention or mentality. So if the government wants us to stay mentally sick, does the population want us to stay physically inactive or physically fit? So does that correlate from one to the other?
I mean, I think so. And this is where you cannot make this an all or nothing conversation, right? Like we have to articulate the complications of this. Just because you are the way you are doesn't mean that's actually how you should be. That doesn't mean that's actually how you would be if you had a healthy psychology. People forget that. When you are overweight, 9 out of 10 times you have some level of self-hatred because we receive love through the mouth as babies. And so you start to emotionally eat to manufacture serotonin levels for them to increase. So at some point you have to say, am I creating, well, there's avoidance and approach aspects of life. If you have an avoidance aspect to life where you are going to practice avoidance more than being proactive, then you can reason anything. I think that we need to accept everyone for who they are in that season that they're in. I think that we always need to show love and compassion and empathy, but I don't think that you can make excuses that you are this way because that's just how you are. Like at the end of the day, there's being healthy and there's being unhealthy. That is fairly binary. Now, within that, there's going to be measurements that are a little bit more complicated depending on if you're an endomorph, ectomorph, or mesomorph.
Correct.
But at the end of the day, like, when you're not healthy, it. Now, if you're going to acknowledge it, that's up to you. And that's only what you can do because you know just as well as I do, you can lead a horse to water. You
Yes.
can't make them drink. And one thing that I had to let go of years ago is I can't help someone who doesn't want help.
That's so true. So I think everyone is practicing cognitive dissonance at this point when they actually feel that, oh, no, it's okay because, either I go into a diet, but then if I see a donut there, yeah, you know what? It's okay. I didn't eat today, so I could go and jump and take this, but they don't realize the impact that they have in their health. Now, when it comes to the happiness aspect of people who are struggling with their mental illnesses or even in your practice, because if let's say someone comes to you, Elizabeth, and they're not productive at work or the company that actually seek your services, there must be also a direct correlation with the level of happiness of their staff or their employees. So how do you address the happiness issue or the happiness struggles that people are going through?
Yeah, well, I first like to take that holistic viewpoint. I also like to clarify with clients that happiness is fleeting and joy is everlasting, and so we want peaks of happiness. I mean, to be happy all the time would actually be torturous, quite frankly. Like we need a full range of emotions. I also like again going back to the holistic comment because a lot of people are like, I'm one way at work and I'm one way in my personal life. And I'm like, no, you're not. Sorry, that's not true. You might not do it to the T, but wherever you fail at home, you fail at work. And so we've got to take that holistic approach and look at it. And then it just comes to like looking at the culture, looking at effective communication. A lot of people sometimes, well, not everyone should be a manager, first off.
Yes.
The bias of some of the managers out there, especially in the technology companies, is mouth dropping to me. But it's, for me, it's doing a diagnostics of what is going on big picture. It's observing, it's looking at their leadership styles. There's so many aspects that I'm looking at, and then I like to look at that human being and figure out where's their brain overdeveloped, because that's going to be a huge component, especially if they're more negative. And where do we need to do some rewiring with them? And then what does a healthy culture look like in that community at the same time? And so it's really trying to find ways to like repair and mend and create a system to move forward. Just like in regular relationships, it comes down to communication and trust. And then like how much is contempt? What are the systems and processes? And so it really kind of just depends on what they're hiring me for or what they're doing. But what people forget is everything comes down to psychology. So I'm really looking at the psychology at the end of the day, the thoughts, the communication, the linguistics. And then from there, I make a plan that's personalized and also more holistic for the entire company.
Beautiful. Well, it's interesting that you have that both knowledge, that both expertise that allows you to go so deep into the human mind to be able to understand all the triggers or
Yeah.
all the issues that actually occur on a day-to-day basis that bring the person to become or behave the way they do. So
Right.
it's just a constant, I would say, understanding of